Hello students, in this video I'm going to start looking at the platform tutorial game that we have available from our game template section. So if we are on our game development class page, we're coming to the game template section over here, and we are scrolling down to currently the second tutorial or second template, which is a basic platform game mechanic. Now I'm going to be following the link here, the original source of this tutorial. Down here I do have a document version where I have taken the web-based tutorial and just sort of put it into a Word doc and done a little bit of formatting. You might find that easier, and if you're the sort of person who likes to print something out, that would be the option that I would be choosing. We also have here a copy of the platform assets. So the assets are things like the sprites and sounds and so forth that will be used. And I also have a platform sample. This is the final code running essentially what you can see, this animation up here. So what I'm going to be doing is opening up this tutorial, and I've already got that loaded in the side here. So I'm going to keep this over to the side, roughly over here. And I'm going to grab the platform assets file as well and just download that to my computer ready to go. It's a zip file, so depending whether you're running Windows or Mac, it may open automatically or it may not, but it's a zip file that you can open up. From here I'm going to start a new Godot program. So finding the Godot engine on your computer, if you haven't got it installed, of course you need to do so, but that's a fairly straightforward process which can be done separately. But I'm going to bring up my Godot engine, and I'm going to start a new project in this case. So a new project here on the right. I'll call this platform tutorial. I'll put video on the end for that case, and I will change the location to where I'm currently keeping all my Godot tutorials, and we'll put it in there. Okay, oops, I've got to do create folder, that's better, and create and edit. So I'll be getting my Godot. Now I'm just going to have to adjust the Godot window slightly because it is not fitting in the space I want for this video. So just give me a moment to do that, because I'd like to fit that in next to the tutorial that I've got running. Ideally, I'd love some more space overall, but to have both things fit in the video, this is the way I shall work. So first thing we're doing is we've downloaded the assets and we've started a new game. So I'm going to drag them in now, and you can see I have the Godot platform assets. Now I'm just going to rename this quickly just to be assets. So let's rename the folder. There it is. And we'll just call it assets like that, just to simplify it. And inside there is the audio, the font, and the sprites that we'll be needing in this tutorial. Okay, let's scroll down. Again, there's lots of ads in this. We don't need to worry about the installation process. We can skip past all of that if you haven't done so. Okay, here is where we are starting. So, nope, here we go. This is where we're starting from, sorry. So let's begin with a new 2D scene. So a 2D scene, we are making a 2D game. Currently we're in the 3D view, so we're going to change to 2D for a second, and we'll add a new 2D scene. Now the 2D scene is going to be called main scene. So when we add this scene, you see it's called node 2D, which is the default 2D node, and we're going to rename this to be main. All right, and that is listed over here on the instructions. So we'll call this one main scene. Now it's very important when you are naming things in Godot and in most programming languages that you think carefully about your caps and your case because they will be different. So this is capital M, capital S. It's what we call camel case, where you do different words that are squashed together with capitals for each word though. This would be different to main scene with a lower m, lower s. So it's important that you think carefully about and use the correct case. Neither one is more correct than the others, just that if you name it one way, i.e. this case with M and S being capitals, and you try to refer to it later with lowercase, it will give you an error. Okay, we're going to save our scene straight away, so we can do that with the Control S on Windows, Command S I believe on Mac, but again I'm just going to simply go scene, and I'm going to save scene. Because it hasn't been named before, it's going to ask me what I want to call it. It's going to take the name of the root node, which we've called main scene, as the name, and that's fine. Now I am going to do something a little bit different to the instructions here, and I'm going to create a folder here, and I'm going to call this scenes. All right, and I'm going to then put my main scene in there. Now this is just good housekeeping to keep things a little bit more organized on the left. So whenever we are saving a scene, we're going to save it into the scenes folder. A little bit different to instructions. All right, let's go down. We're now going to create our player. Okay, so we're going to create a new scene. Now this is not underneath main scene, and this is where I know some students make mistakes. They come here and they add a new scene in. We want to add a completely new scene. So we're going to go up to the scene menu and we're going to choose new scene. Now this is also going to be a 2D scene, but it's not going to be a basic 2D scene. We're going to start by choosing other node, because what we want is what's called a kinematic body 2D. A kinematic body 2D is a 2D node that is going to be able to interact using physics. That's what kinematic body means. Okay, so it's going to be able to collide with things, be able to be moved around and so forth, which is exactly, of course, what we want our player to be able to do. So we can search for that here, kinematic body. All right, and not this one. This is our 3D, so ignore these red based ones. We want the 2D version. So we're going to click that, and you can see it is a kinematic body 2D. Now we are first of all going to rename that to be our player. So like before, we're going to rename this node and we're going to call it player, again with a capital P. And we're again going to save that node. Because it's the first time that it's going to be saved, it's going to ask us what we want to call it. And again, it's going to default to using the first node. So this is player, and that is good. And as I said before, I'm saving that in my scenes folder for a bit of organization, but I'll press save. Scrolling down in our tutorial, okay, we're now going to add some children nodes. So the first thing we're going to do is select add a child node. So we're on the player scene and we're going to add 2 nodes to this. The first one is a collision shape 2D and the second one is a sprite. The collision shape will allow our player to actually collide with other things and gives it some actual shape to it. And the sprite is what we will be able to visually see. So let's add both of those in. So we're going to make sure we're on the player node. We're going to click plus and we're going to add a collision shape. Again, we're just going through basic collision shape 2D, and then click on player again and add another node, and that will be our sprite. And again, we're just looking for a basic sprite in this case, not an animated. We'll talk about that later. And so we can see our tree structure here on the left. We have the player as the main node, and underneath it we have a collision and a sprite. What we don't want is this, where our sprite is a child of the collision, which is a child of the player. You have to get your tree structure correct, okay? And with more experience, this will make more sense to you. But for now, just look carefully at the images that are in the examples and make sure yours are following along. Okay. Now we'll notice we've got a little error here, and if we hover over that error, it's telling us that we need to provide a shape for our collision shape, and we'll be getting to that in just a moment. But before we do that, we're going to add our sprite. So we're going to click on the sprite node, and over here on the right hand side are the properties or the values that we can change for the particular node that we've highlighted. So for this sprite node, one of the things we can change is the texture, and the texture is just the name for the picture. And we're going to bring in a picture, this little character here, from our resources. So if we go into our assets file we made before, we open up our sprites or expand it out a bit more, and we can see this one called player idle. That's the one that is asking us to use. So we can drag player idle from our assets and just drag it over the texture box in our properties, let go, and you can see we now have a little character showing up. But we want it to be nice and centered, and that's what it's saying down here. So we're going to open the transform drop down. So again, sprite node selected still. Look down here, we can see transform, and we're going to change its position if it wasn't already to 0, 0. Okay, and that'll have the effect of moving our little character into a better position. All right, like it is now. So if your player was a little bit over here, for example, you can see the transform has changed, and simply choosing that to be 0 and 0 puts it back to this, what we're calling centered position. Okay, we're now going to be adding a collision shape. Okay, so we're going to fix this error that we've seen. That's what we're talking about here. And we're going to add that shape. So we're going to click on the collision shape node, and now its properties over here, the shape is what we're looking for. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to just use a capsule in this case. You can see there are different types of shapes, and we can look at some of those at a later stage. But for now, in this tutorial, we're using a capsule. So we've made a new capsule shape, and if we zoom in, we might be able to see it. Now the reason we can't is because the sprite is in front of the collision shape. So we can rearrange these just by swapping them around so that we can see our collision shape in front. Now we're going to set its radius, its height, and its position. You can set them manually with the values over here, or you can drag them with the little handles here. Now just be careful that when you do click that you don't accidentally click on your sprite, and you can see I changed node there, that you are very careful that you're only grabbing the right handles. So if I grab that and I try and move it down a bit, I'm just trying to give my capsule something that sits roughly at the sides and roughly at its feet. So there we go, very much like the picture down here. I have a capsule that roughly goes to its sides, left and right, and the top and the bottom. Okay, so now I have a player with a sprite so I can visually see it, and a collision shape so that it can hit and interact with other things. Rightio. Let's save that, so Control S or Command S, or again scene save, and because we've saved it before, it doesn't ask for a name anymore, it just saves it. And that's a good idea to save regularly. Let's now move on to adding a script. So script, of course, is what gives actions to our objects and scripts, sorry, what am I trying to say? Gives actions to our nodes and scenes, sorry, that we're creating. Without a script, it's not going to really do much. So we're going to create a script for our player node. So let's click on the player node, and you can create scripts against almost every node, but this script is going to be made against the player because everything in there is going to be related to the player. Okay, so with our player node selected, let's choose the new script icon. That's this little icon here. You can also go through the menus, but I'm just going to hit that one there. Now, again, it's going to ask us what type of script. So these things can generally be kept the same, or left to the defaults, I should say. But I am going to change the path. Now, like before, I'm going to create a new folder. So I'm going to go back one level to my main scene directory, and I'm going to create a new folder here called scripts. And again, this is not part of the tutorial, but it's good housekeeping. So I'm going to still keep it as player.gd. So GD represents a script, and it's going to be made in that scripts folder. So I'm just keeping things a little bit organized. So you can see over here now, I have a scenes folder and I have a scripts folder, just to keep things a bit organized. So we scroll down, and we're going to be putting this script in. Now, I'm not going to read it out from here, but what I am going to do is jump down to the bottom, and I'm going to copy some of this in. I went a bit too fast, sorry. So we're going to skip over this for a second. Oh, we're going to start here. Okay, so we are going to have sorry, I just accidentally hid the game there. Let's go back. That's better. So this is our default. Now we can keep that there for now, but we're going to jump ahead and we're going to copy this bit of code in here. So I'm just going to literally copy this out of the tutorial, and I'm going to paste it in. Now it's going to come up here underneath the extends kinematic body 2D. So that just basically means that we're taking all the functions of a kinematic body 2D already. And I'm basically going to just replace this bit of commented text with this text here. Now these are setting up some variables that we're going to use. So the word var just means that we're creating a variable. We're going to call it score. It's got a colon after it to say that's the end of the name. It's being an int, which is an integer, and we're setting with a default value of 0. So that's going to be our score value. If we look through the rest of these, we can see another similar one, which is going to be called speed. It's an integer again with a value of 200, jump force, gravity. So those are kind of all similar. Then we get this special one here that we're calling val, which is going to be our velocity, and it's a special type called vector2. Now, vector2 is just a built-in type that has two values built into it, and we usually refer to those as x and y. And they're really good for things like velocities and positions of things in the 2D space because they're an x and a y, but really it can hold any two values that we like. And we're creating that as a blank vector2 essentially at the moment. And the last type we're creating right now is what we call a bool or a boolean, and that basically means a true or false value, and we're giving it a value of false to begin with. Okay, and if you read through the tutorial, again, it just finds more about this vector2 and what it means. Now we're also going to bring in this component, so let's grab that bit of code and we'll paste it just below as well. And we are saying when this node is ready, that's what the on ready means, create another variable called sprite, and it's going to hold the sprite of our player. Now the $ means it's a child of where this script is. So the script is attached to player. We've called it sprite. Notice a capital S, so that matches the name we gave it here. If this was called something different over here, if it was called player sprite, then we would have to change this value here. But because we followed the guide at this point, this copy and paste is working. And again, we can read more about that if we want to in the tutorial. Now, before we go any further, we are going to need to set some keys up for the actions before we start looking at this moving left, right, and jumping. So that's what this is going through here. But basically, we are going to go to the project menu, the project settings, and then to the input map. And these are different keys and button that have been set up by default. So you can see there's things for user interface. That's what UI stands for: user interface home, user interface left, right, up, down, stuff like that. So these are default, and you can either keep or delete these if you really wanted to. But we're going to create 3 of our own that we are going to call move_left, move_right, and jump. And that way we can refer to these names in our code for movement. So let's create those now. So we do that in the action up the top. We're going to just type them in. Now notice again, these are all lowercase. So we're going to add, and we're going to have move_right, and then we're going to have jump as our last one. So if we look down the bottom of our list, we have those 3 names essentially, but we haven't given them a key to use. So now we can actually add this, what's going on here. We can add a key next. So if I press this little plus next to move left, I'm going to have a key as my my action, and move left is going to be my left arrow. So I'm just pressing that on my keyboard and pressing OK. And you can now see move left is using the keyboard left arrow. Let's add the right in the same way, and the jump. Now in this one, jump is the up arrow, which is fine, I'll do that. But I also prefer to use spacebar in my games for jump, so I'm going to add another one. And this is a great thing. You can have multiple keys or even buttons, etc., that can do the same action. So in my game, I'm going to have both the up arrow key and the spacebar key being referred to as the jump key. So this is also where, for example, if you are using a joypad or a game controller, basically, you can also set buttons and so forth from those, and different mouse buttons as well. So you can actually set up lots of different control options that do the same action. So it doesn't matter if you picked up a game controller or you're using the keyboard. If you had programmed both to be considered a jump, then it will still control properly. But once we've done that, sorry, I went out of it by accident. Let's see, I think I must have saved it. Let's just double check. Project settings, yep, it's good. And we'll close that to make sure it's saved. Okay, we're now going to create a new function called the process physics function. Now, it's got an underscore at the front. Not critical, but it is important you put it there. It basically means that you shouldn't make something else do physics. It's something you don't really need to understand right now, but let's just put it in for the moment. We're going to copy the piece of code there. And earlier on, we'll just paste it over this one here. We talked about how this pass command just means there's nothing happening here at the moment, but we want to have that function listed, mainly because we're going to use it later, but we don't want to give an error. If we didn't have that pass command there, you'll see that we'll get an error down here saying that, hey, it's expecting something to happen, but we haven't. So let's put the pass back in. All right. We're now going to build up our function process physics process. So the first thing we're going to be doing is our horizontal velocity, so the movement left and right. So again, I'm going to copy this bit of code and I'm going to replace that pass in our physics with that. Now it's important with our indentation, so I'm just going to indent that properly so it's one indented in, which means it's part of this function. Okay, and that is basically now saying set our velocity x, so x is going to represent our horizontal velocity. Remember, val is this vector 2 from the top, so the x component of velocity is going to be equal to 0 at the start of this process. We're then going to check if the input has just been pressed move left, so that's that key that we set up just before, and if we are just pressing the left key, we're going to decrease our velocity of x by the amount of speed. So basically going to take 200 off the velocity value and put it back into x. And in a similar token, we're pressing right, we're going to increase the x component of velocity by our speed amount, which is 200. Okay. Moving down in our tutorial a bit, we now need to apply that velocity. So if we take that bit of code and we'll put it underneath here, and again we're just going to have to tab that in to make sure it lines up properly. That is taking the velocity that we've been creating up here and applying it with this new built-in thing called move and slide. Now I won't go into move and slide too much, it's something you can look into more, but essentially this is going to physically move our character using this value, and this vector 2 up tells the computer which way up is. In this case, that pointing up our screen is our up direction, and again I won't go into too much about that right now, but it's important that this command is correctly done. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different for the moment. I'm not going to and you know what, I'll keep going. I'll stick to the tutorial for you. So now we're going to do gravity. So in a similar way, let's copy this gravity code out. We'll put it underneath everything we've been doing here. And again, you might just need to indent this in properly. So we're now looking at the Y component, our up and down movement. And we are going to be taking our gravity value up here of 800 and multiplying it by this value called delta. Now, delta is an important thing that we'll talk more about later, but it basically allows or helps us to keep our game running smoothly on computers of varying speed. And it has to do with how many frames essentially are being drawn in any given period of time. And delta is a built-in time element that we can use to help smooth out our game. Okay. So we'll just go with it for now. It's something that we can understand a bit more about later on. Then if we go a little bit further down, we've got one more bit of code that we want to add in at this point, and that is this part here, which is about flipping our sprite. So we'll put that in, and again we're going to have to just do a little bit of tabbing to get that to sit in the right spot. Okay, so this is a simple if-else that says if our velocity of x, or our x component, so our horizontal x, is less than 0, so it's moving to the left, remember negative is moving to the left, we're going to flip horizontally our sprite. So that's going to flip our sprite to face in that direction. And the other side is if the velocity of x value is greater than 0, we make sure we've unflipped it, so that way it's facing back to the left. And that's important because that's the way we drew our sprite. So remember, when we saw our sprite from before, it was automatically facing to the right. So if we flip it, if flipping horizontally is true, that would make it face to the left. So as it says here, we have finished scripting. We're going to save our sprite. Okay, sorry, not our sprite, sorry, our player. And we're going to go back to the main scene. So that's what it's saying here. Here's our main scene. So let's go into our scenes folder and double click on main scene to reopen it. If you still had it open up the top, so we were in player, you can just click on the tab as well. But if that wasn't there, like it isn't now, I can double click to bring it back. So in our main scene, this is what we can see at the moment. And we're now going to drag our player scene and stick one in. So this is the power of programming in this style with nodes, is we have created a whole new scene that just knows how to be a player, and we're now putting that scene into the main scene. So you can see that the player is now a child of this main scene, and it exists in this world essentially. So now we're going to test our game. So we're going to press the play button up the top here, and we're going to get this error the first time. And it will only happen the first time because basically saying that we haven't told it which scene to play first when we press play. So we're going to select and we're going to choose our main scene so that we always run main scene as our starting point. And you might have noticed our player was there. Let me stop it and try again. Our player is there and it's falling off the screen. And that's correct because we applied gravity. Now, if I'm quick about it and I press a key, so I'm going to press the right key, you can see my player's moving a little bit, but I'm very quickly falling off the screen. So that is a problem, okay? Now I'm going to stop this tutorial video here because we are already pretty much half an hour in. So we will continue creating a tile in the next video.